With Back for Blood on the horizon, I think it's about time we wrapped up L4D and L4D2, God, I can't believe I have to call it that, as the green flu entered a few weeks into its post-infection stage. Many people were turned into the initial horde. They would swarm survivors left over that were kind of out in the open, but an issue would arise for those infected. The main one being, humans are relatively smart. They were able to outmaneuver and outthink the infected, thus leading to the non-infected surviving as the weeks began to slip away. However, due to the naturally mutagenic nature of the virus and the millions infected, the virus was able to access the human genetic coding, and this would allow for some fairly bizarre things to begin happening. The virus would begin altering the bodies of people slowly at first, but these new special infected would become more and more frequent in regular encounters. One special infected in particular had the mutations result in one of the most unbalanced but absolutely devastating creatures should it be able to grab a person. Looking like a teenager whose parents have been out of town for a week, this infected appears to be one of the more strangely afflicted humans concerning the green flu. Charging into a group of survivors, it had the strength to knock everyone down, and specifically concerning its mutations, likely sever spines and wreck spinal cords of any person within its grasp. So we all saw the thumbnail, and that opener clearly mentions what we were talking about, the giant right-armed charger. Today's episode, we will discuss the extent of its mutations, why it may have changed this way, and how has this affected its ability to hunt down humans, or at least decimate humans. All right, let's get okay. So with that out of the way, the first thing I would want to talk about is what happened to this person based on their outward appearance and what we may be able to ascertain from their background. First, this type of special infected is an adult male. At some point, they were exposed to the green flu, much like any other infected, but what's interesting is, judging by the clothing that they are wearing and where we know the fallback points were concerning the infection, this person likely belonged to a more rural area. It would seem that really there were no untouched areas, whether they be cities, swamps, or even just large open fields. The reason this person was possibly infected, however, considering the further into rural territory that you actually go, could be from the people that were fleeing the virus in their own city or town. The key here is that the green flu can sometimes be airborne, and then sometimes it's not. So anyone passing through sucking wind if they were on foot would have spread this disease to the smaller, more isolated communities around them. It's important to establish that likely this adult male was from this more rural area because it explains the extent of the mutations. Now, back when this game is set and for this time period, let's be real, suspenders were worn in more isolated areas. Sort of like how if you wore a pair of jeans in the 50s, people would probably assume that you were some sort of farmer. As time progressed in our universe, obviously you can be in cities, and it's even kind of fashionable to a degree to wear jean suspenders with your jean jacket and jean flip-flops. But again, for this time period, it's likely indicating a more rural existence than, say, one of a city or large town. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this out there because, after all, it is a breakdown video, or really more of an explored video. The charger, at one point or another in their previous human life, was either like a farmer or a mechanic, or in general, a tradesman. Because of this, they likely work with their hands more often, and as with most people, you are either right-hand dominant, which is more common, or a heretic who is left-hand dominant and actually does have a shorter lifespan as a result of their heresy. And now that I've made at least 8% of my audience mad, there's also those ambidextrous people, but I feel like they're just really being greedy with their hand abilities. Regardless, the person was likely right-handed from what we can see. But before discussing why the arm turned the way it did, we must first understand the overall morphology and discuss what has happened concerning proportions. So lots of new people here don't know where we have to start, but for you long haulers, you're very aware. Starting with the feet, we see that there's already some differences between the two in terms of sizes and available footwear. On the right foot exists what appears to be roughly an average-sized foot. In fact, it's so average that the original sneaker the person was wearing when they met their end, technically, is still on their foot. Nothing out of the ordinary except the lightly gray skin, which is all over the charger, likely due to actual oxygen demands, because we know that the arm and likely the leg as well as core are probably taking up a ton of oxygen, but we will get to that momentarily. However, moving to the left leg and foot, we see some major changes beginning to show up. The left foot is roughly double the size of the right foot, and this allows for the charger, much unlike the tank, to support its own weight properly, but has also given the creature a strange overall unbalanced appearance. Moving up to the legs, the song is still the same. The right leg is by no means emaciated, but is about the size of a regular human leg. Well, actually, it may be a little bit smaller, but as I said, we'll discuss that later on. Now moving to the left leg, it's actually fairly proportional to the foot that's attached. The entire leg has had added muscle mass due to the forces being applied to the body in an effort to counteract the upper body. Because the center of gravity in males is roughly about the chest chest, the legs would need to act as a sort of counterbalance to the arm unless the creature becomes completely useless and then falls over, which they will be infecting no one at that point. These legs are also, as mentioned previously, strong enough to keep the creature upright and stable, but also allows it to charge and run faster than that of a survivor. Because of this, however, the added muscle mass has begun to split the front of the jeans of the charger, and we can actually see some muscle mass has been added to the connection point in the pelvis, likely pulling the pelvis to the side, which may actually cause some issues long term for the skeletal structuring of this infected. The bones within the legs are likely very different from one another. The right leg, tibia, fibula, and femur would be smaller as they have less force acting on them from the muscle pulling on the bone. The left leg would likely have much thicker bones, however, but the drawback is the human knee. With this much force being applied to the ligaments, this would likely break them down quickly, which may ultimately end up in a creature after a few weeks operating under these conditions to slow down and eventually lose the ability to walk. Moving up to the abdomen of this creature, we can see that obviously muscle within the abdominal wall has been added. This once again counteracts the pulling of the right arm and left leg. If the abdomen did not have this added muscle mass, then the creature would likely be rather bendy with a weak core, and then one wrong move would probably snap the spine like a twig. But because it has been beefed up overall, it is able to resist these forces that it puts upon itself. Moving up to the chest, we see that this creature has blood not from someone else, but from its own face, which we will get to in a minute. The right pectoral has probably grown to be about 3 to 4 times the size of what would be considered normal. The left pectoral has grown somewhat as well, but really is not so much in the operation of the left arm, but to help in the pull required to move the right arm. We can see in the shoulders that they are telling very different physiological function stories, as the right shoulder has had the anterior and lateral deltoids pulled further to the front to directly fuse with the pectoral muscle to almost form a sheet of muscle. This sheet of muscle pulls the arm with tremendous force, requiring the trapezius muscles around the neck to also be increased in size. The right trapezius is massive, whereas the left has also had some muscle mass added to it. However, the slab of muscle almost appears to run across the top of the shoulder girdle and move the head out of the way. Its purpose now is to fuse with the right arm's deltoids and allow this creature again to be able to move that arm without totally twisting the body into an unusable state. The left arm shoulder is actually about normal, really only appearing to serve as an afterthought. It exists to provide some aid for the muscle further out from the arm, but serves little past this. And that is because the left arm is almost completely useless. The biceps and triceps are there to kind of some degree, but as you move down further, the forearm is smaller than what can be considered average, and the hand almost looks completely broken down internally with nothing but the bone left and possibly a few ligaments. This has rendered that arm paralyzed, and actually, it really can't be used in any attack as a result. Now moving on to the moneymaker, the right arm has been heavily altered, appearing about double to triple that of a literal average leg. This arm is absolutely devastating, and its main point of attack is basically just smashing into things. Having this ability to crash through walls and mow down survivors with a single charge, it is able to absorb the brunt and transfer of a massive amount of force. However, absorption doesn't necessarily mean dissipation. The arm is dark green in appearance and likely suggesting that the skin on the outside is nothing but callous and expired. In fact, we don't have to just assume this, because if you look at the forearm, we can see the meaty goodness underneath. The rest of the skin on the creature, again as mentioned previously, likely due to oxygen demands from this giant arm and giant leg, means that all the skin isn't really getting the oxygen it needs, so it's become ashen and gray. This red flesh, however, is likely this new skin and may even be some muscle exposed from running into so many walls. This means that the callus is roughly about an inch thick, which protects the charger from damage by hitting objects, but that force would still be imparted into the muscle and bone. And speaking of bone, all of this would need to be overhauled. The humerus, radius, and ulna bones, as well as elbow and shoulder joints, need to be at minimum double their size. Now, for the actual joints, this would create an issue, but it does appear that the arm is still able to move. But doubling the size of the bone would prevent the constant fracturing from impacts, as if it broke too much, the arm too would become a floppy mess and capable of being used in an attack. The meat around the bone would provide some protection, but unless the base, which is the bone, is strengthened, it really wouldn't matter. The right hand of this creature has become gigantic. With the bones growing elsewhere in the body, so too have they grown in the hand. However, only the very tips of the finger are still visible in the muscular mass. Survivors can still catch these hands even if the charger misses them. Acting almost like a mace, the charger can then swipe at people, imparting a massive amount of blunt force, breaking bones, snapping muscle, and in general, incapacitating. Moving up to the head, we see this creature has been heavily damaged. Likely they didn't possess this level of damage initially, but as their face has become rather skeletal in appearance, the jaw with teeth are still quite visible, but their nose is completely missing. This appears to be damage rather than from like an adaptation, seeing as blood is still running down it, and it may have been ripped off from running into walls over time. The brow ridge shows evidence that bone mass has been added to the body and skull, and the yellow eyes sit recessed in the skull. The top right of the skull has been caved in somewhat, which absolutely seems to be from the fact that this creature charges and hits, and at some point the skull was caved in by an unlucky hit. Despite this creature having very obvious brain damage from these hits, believe it or not, if you listen carefully, you can actually hear it talking. It will say things like "charging hurts my bones," "already dead," and "don't shoot me." Some of its humanity would be left over, considering that it's using these phrases, but that doesn't seem to stop it from attacking. Overall, this creature appears to be heavily damaged. Its body has adapted in some ways by shifting muscle mass from the left arm, reabsorbing it into the body, and then using that protein to build up the right arm. Likely the left leg has played a role in this as well, but the body has also sent the osteoclast to break down bone in these two limbs and then bolster the left leg and right arm as well. The virus has likely inspired muscular growth regardless of these areas, but the question is, why? Well, on this channel, for those that don't know, the general running idea I have with the green flu is that it kind of co-ops what's already in you and then uses that to completely alter how you appear. For instance, the witch likely had low blood sugar due to her wedding, which causes mood swings to be affected. The boomer had damage to its vagus nerve and as a result could not actually move food through, and this was likely caused by diabetes, and this allowed for volatile gases to build up, resulting in the boom. And the jockey, who had bipolarism, which resulted in a constant state of mania after its infection, led to massive levels of dopamine just being pumped into it, which causes the twitching and fidgeting that we see. Basically, if you want to watch all of those, I may be a little biased, but I think they're pretty good explanations. But one in particular that I have covered can help us understand what is happening to the charger as it already appeared concerning mutations, and that's with the tank. So a quick synopsis, the tank is essentially a soldier who became infected. Their lower body remained small, whereas their upper body had a massive amount of muscle added to it. So much so that during its rage, this muscle and rage will cause the person to expire via a heart attack. They do not get the rage out. This has completely unbalanced them as well, and now they must walk on their knuckles like a gorilla to support their body. I hypothesized, using this idea that the green flu just affects what's already there, that because of a soldier's propensity to work out their upper body more likely than their lower body, this resulted in muscle cell nucleus donations. When you work out a specific portion of your body more so than others, it really does remember it. The nucleus donation process will ensure that the muscle will grow faster next time should the need arise, and this will even work if you say stop working out for a while and then go back. They're kind of called noob gains a little bit. And this is what I believe the green flu interacted with in the tank to make them as massive as they are. I also believe this to be the case with the charger, but the question is why? Well, it's clear to me any portion of the body that may receive more use than the other, plus accompanied by something other than the initial green flu strain, results in more profound changes. The charger exists because of their proximity to the outbreak zones, their employment, and their timing. Likely concerning their employment or hobbies, they may have been like a farmer or a mechanic who was right-handed or anything in the trade industry that required the use of their right arm more than their left arm. Because of this, more muscle over time would have been applied to these areas. Or you know what? Maybe they just really enjoyed the internet. Who's to say? But over time, this nucleus donation would have taken place to these areas of muscle in their dominant arms and possibly their dominant leg. I have a belief that they were more likely farmers, and in their work, they would use their left leg to push and then they would pull with their right arm, and also this would engage the core to kind of stabilize everything. So during the initial outbreak, they were separated from the chaos, still working in their fields. This allowed them to remain isolated long enough for the virus to get nice and familiar with the human genetic coding. Over time, this would prove to be their downfall. Eventually, people realized that this wasn't just a flu and then started fleeing the cities to more rural areas. Someone who was infected may have gone to a town before succumbing and then infected this farmer. As a result, the muscle they had on their body that already had a propensity to be used more so than the other side of their body would begin to alter and change and then grow. This growth would put tremendous strain on the body and would require an absolute ludicrous amount of nutrition, sucking away protein and bone mass from the other sides of their body, where the bone mass was also likely not as high, seeing as more strain equals stronger bones. It would have been applied to the areas the virus already detected as highly used, thus resulting in a very strange and unbalanced looking body. Strangeness aside, this hasn't hindered the charger, because this strength in the left leg and the almost regular leg, which is, if you didn't know, your legs are actually extremely strong just in their original form. In fact, I don't want to brag, but once upon a time, I used to be able to leg press over 1,000 pounds. Yeah, I've totally screwed up my knees. Anyways, this has allowed the creature to be able to stand stand upright by using its core and then run at survivors faster than a person can normally run. However, once a charge has started, it's not able to turn after getting that much momentum going in a certain direction, but it then will list kind of lazily to the right due to the weight of its right arm. In a lot of ways, survivors can just dodge the attacks by just getting out of the way. However, should it grab you, it's not pretty. So now, let's go into a little bit of morbid curiosity and just kind of figure out what happens if it does grab you. So the charger isn't really so much about rage, but due to the brain injury it has sustained, it's not exactly in control either, just like really all the other infected. It's likely more of a primal portion of the brain that's in control, along with the virus, and this is because of the damage to the cerebrum and frontal lobe from some impact in the past. When the charger grabs a person, it will slam them against a car, wall, ceiling, but usually on the ground over and over and over again. At first, the survivor can stay conscious, but with each hit, the body would incur traumatic injuries. Cracked sternums, broken ribs, whiplash, skull fractures to the back of the head. The main issue would be nervous system damage. Humans aren't meant to take sustained damage to the spine, which is exactly where this creature is slamming you. Eventually, this would force fragments of vertebrae into your actual spinal cord, resulting in shock and paralysis, but with your head slamming into objects over and over again, you would quickly lose consciousness and skull fragments would enter the brain, causing a massive internal hemorrhage, leading to a person's quick expiration. Likely, you could resist the first few hits, but as soon as you go unconscious, it would basically be game over for your brain as it becomes liquefied by the insane force being imparted into it. Again, even if this creature misses you, it can still smack the hell out of you. In reality, this could even kind of cave in your skull. But if it's a body blow, you are talking about broken bones and internal bleeding, and you really may not be able to stop that. So it's best just to sit way in the back and snipe this thing from afar.